let's get started. Tonight we're going to talk about the document object model, which we've talked a little bit about, but we'll go into a little more detail. The document object model is what allows JavaScript to essentially modify an existing web page and make it dynamic. It's very powerful, and you can do all kinds of things with it. We've used it a little bit already, and it's not that crazy. I mean, there's a built-in object called a document, which allows JavaScript to access any part of the web page it wants. It gives you scripting access to all elements of a web page. Like I said, using JavaScript, you can create, modify, and remove elements in the page dynamically. And this is what makes Web 2.0 possible. With DOM, HTML elements can be treated as objects, and many attributes of HTML5 elements can be treated as the properties of those objects. Yeah, by the way, the DOM existed pre-HTML5. It's just gotten a little bit better. One of the methods of the document object that you're going to use the most is called the getElementById. This allows you to get access to any element on the page based on its ID. So we talked about IDs earlier in the semester, and now we're going to see how we're going to use it dynamically. We'll also talk about nodes. Essentially, a tag or an element is a node, but it lives on a tree. So a node at the root of the HTML document is part of that root, but then if you have nested elements or tags, then it's a node within a node. So there can be a child-parent relationship. So it kind of looks like a tree. They call it a tree. And you've got all kinds of different developer tools. All the browsers have developer tools of one kind or another. You can display developer tools. You can see the different options here. Windows and Linux and Chrome. On Explorer, it's F12. So if we were to hit these buttons, it would bring us up to developer tools. So on Explorer, which is what I've got open here, if I hit F12, let's see what we get. Okay, so it shows some stuff here that we can use. I've never been that crazy about the developer tools on IE. I've always kind of liked the Firefox ones better, actually. And of course, you can get at those ones as well, which is just Control-Shift-I. Okay, maybe you can. Okay, Control-Shift-I is not working. But you can also actually get it from here. I've actually never done it that way before. Go down to Web Developer and go to Error Console, for example. Pretty helpful to use when debugging JavaScript. This first example shows you a basic HTML5 elements. The DOM tree for the document contains a DOM node for every element, and it's ordered. So here's a fairly small typical page, and the L1 or Li would actually be a child within the UL, which would be a child within body. So we can look at how this works in a moment. And if we display it, and I have that example here as well. Where is it? There it is. This is the first example. It's not really showing us very much. I mean, there's nothing here that we haven't seen before. So it's just explaining that this is a DOM. We will actually see some examples where we actually use the document object to change things. Now you can go through the inspector in IE if you want with this. And you can see right here that you can open it, right? So HTML is the very root of the document, and then these are all branches off of it. So you can see how you can just kind of go through, and you can see the line items are all branches off of that. So you can link through all of them. Traversing and modifying the DOM tree. The next example demonstrates several DOM node features and two additional document objects. It's going to allow us to highlight, modify, insert, and remove elements. CSS class highlighted is applied. dynamically to the elements. So we've got this example here, which we'll look at in a moment, and we're going to manipulate it with the DOM. Okay, so it's creating, and notice that it's giving IDs to everything, ID, because that's what we need to do. And there's going to be a form that basically says, enter the ID, and it's going to do something based on that ID. Place, remove, look at this example here. Okay, so this will let us do for something, for example, if I say para1, and I type in para1, and I say get by ID, notice it now highlights that. So if we look at what it's doing here, you've got a couple of options. Function get by ID essentially does that, and what it does is it gets the element that you type in there, gets a reference to it, and calls this switch to function, JavaScript function, which if we look down here, the switch to removes the highlighting from the old one, assigns the new node to the current node, so it's a global variable we've been using, and assigns the highlighted CSS to it, and then puts the ID in the get element by ID, the GBI, which if we look at here, GBI is the ID for, where is it? It's going to be in the form. Yeah, GBI is the ID for what we typed into. I can insert before. So, for example, that inserts a blank one. You see right there, it inserted a blank. I can come down here and I can say remove. Remove current. Oh, it's a top level. We can't remove it. Okay. You can also append a child, which will put a child right under it. You can see there. So you've got quite a bit of control over these things. An object. I mean, right now all it's doing is using changing the CSS style sheet. If we look up here, a highlight simply changes the background color to yellow is all it does. And we've got a variable, global variable for current node because we need that. And insert simply creates a new node based on the value that's in there, and inserts on the parent node the new node. And then it switches to the new node. Append will simply call append child to whatever that new node is. Replace current would replace it. And remove would remove it. So by getting access to the node with the get element by ID, that's probably the most useful method in the document, you are able to manipulate it many different ways. Any questions on this example? We're really starting to get into some dynamic stuff by doing this. Okay, it's gone. JavaScript declares two variables, current node and iCount. Current node keeps track of the highlighted node. The functionality of each button depends on which node is currently selected. Variable ID count is used to assign a unique ID to the new elements. So it starts at 0 and it increments at each time. The remainder of the JavaScript code contains event handling functions for the buttons and two helper functions that are called by event handlers. Okay, current node keeps track of the current node. ID count starts at 0. Start just simply creates all the event handlers for them. And there are the functions that will get called for each one. Create new node. Takes the text and creates a new, just a paragraph node. Nothing particularly special. And creates it there. And then switch simply switches. It takes a new node. Before getting it, it sets the current node, which is the to-be old node, back to its nothing class, so that gets rid of the yellow highlighting. So get element by ID, set attribute, and get attribute, are among the most useful to use. And there's a bunch of examples here of what you can do with all of it. Method set attribute and get attribute allow you to modify an attribute value and get an attribute value respectively. Then create element obviously creates an element. Create text node creates a text box. Method append child will insert a node to the end of the existing node. Parent node contains essentially a reference to the parent node. Insert perform method inserts a new node as a child of the parent directly before the current node. The replace child will replaces that child. And of course you can remove a child from the parent node as well. And again, there's some more examples of different things you can do. Okay, any questions on that? It was kind of a lot to cover pretty quickly. Okay. Do you use this? Yes, I do actually use it a lot. Get element by ID I use quite a bit. When we get into some web development stuff, you'll see that, yeah, you do, because you dynamically update pages all the time. I use it all the time. DOM has collection or groups of related objects on a page. DOM collections are accessed as properties of DOM objects such as document object or a DOM node. The document object has properties containing the images collection, links, collection, forms, collection, anchors, and collection. Contain all the elements on the page. The collection's length specifies the number of items in the collection. So essentially you've got an array within the document object of all the elements on the page. And you can actually just loop through it, just with any sort of array. So we can go through each one of them. You have access to the elements using the square brackets just like an array. You can also use the collection method. Named item method retrieves an element based on an element, on a name. There's a couple of different ways of getting to it, including an href property. So we'll see some examples of using that. This next one, which is for collections, let's see what that's going to do. Oh, okay. So I'll show you what it did. What it did was it took the collection of all this stuff and built these links on the page based on that. So we can look at what it did exactly. Process links. So var link list equals document.links. It gets all the links in the document. and it creates a output string called contents. Then it uses a for loop to loop through that list and essentially create a list of links, and it's putting it in a span, calling it a link, which is this up here or this up here. Concatenates it and concatenates a vertical bar to separate them each, and then a document get element by ID links inner HTML equals those contents. So if you look at it, there's no list of links at the very bottom like we see on the page. Okay, so this list of links is not anywhere on the page if we look at it. But yet it's there. And that's because it was created by this JavaScript function. So that gives you an idea of how you can loop through a group of really objects on a particular page and do something with it. So here it is again. We'll go through it. You see the links down there. But when we look at the the code of the whole thing, it's actually this function process links that's doing it based on the document links array essentially, and looping through it to build that bottom line of links. An element style can be changed dynamically in response to anything can really be changed dynamically. The document object's body property refers to the body elements. You can set and get attributes, CSS style sheets, colors, visible, invisible. You have all kinds of things you can set. In this particular example, I think we're just going to prompt for a color, and that's going to change the background color. And it's just got the start. It's just got the the input color, and it just says document.body that says set attribute style background color whatever input color was provided. So if we look at that one right here and I enter cayenne, there's cayenne. So we're able to change the color, and you can do that anywhere you want. The next example introduces the Windows object set interval and clear interval. This creates a timer, which is kind of cool too, because it can be used to kind of just go through images. Or clicks on a thumbnail, the larger version grows from the top left. And let's see if I actually have that one. So this creates a bunch of images, loads them, and then when you click on one of these, it grows them. Let me see if I actually have that. An alternative one we could use. Okay, here we go. So if I click on that, different books, you see what happens there. That's kind of useful. So what it does is these are some variables that start it at a speed of 6. Run count plus equals speed. Count is greater than or equal to 375. It clears the interval, so it stops the counter essentially. It gets the image based on the ID, sets the width to 0.7656 times the count plus p extra pixel, and the height for pixel. So what happens is that when you click on it, it basically says if interval return, which means it's currently running. Otherwise, it gets the image, creates an image, puts a bunch of values in there, replaces the two nodes, and window.setInterval essentially sets a timer. And what this does is this creates a timer that will call function run every 10 milliseconds. So that's 100 times per second. That's really fast. And what it does each time it runs is it makes the image slightly bigger. Takes the count and adds the speed, or 6, to it. And that's 6 pixels. So every time it runs, it makes the picture 6 pixels bigger. And that's how we get this effect. Okay, and a couple of different examples there. The run based on the speed. Sets the attributes. Close display with the different image files every time it runs. And that's using a timer. That's actually quite useful timers. Okay, questions? Any questions?